Welcome to the CES letter, A Closer Look. This video presentation is working from the March 31st, 2015 edition of the CES letter. It will examine pages 50 to 65 dealing with the three witnesses of the Book of Mormon. This is the longest section of the CES letter. The testimony of the three witnesses, now available in the opening pages of the Book of Mormon, states that they have seen the engravings which are upon the plates, and they have been shown unto us by the power of God, and not of man. And we declare with words of soberness that an angel of God came down from heaven, and he brought and laid before our eyes, that we beheld and saw the plates and the engravings thereon. It also declares that they heard the voice of the Lord, and it is signed by Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris. This testimony remained with the men until their deaths. David Whitmer explained, Oliver never wavered in his testimony, and when he was on his deathbed, I was there with many of his friends until he passed away. He bore the same testimony on his dying bed that he had always borne through life, and earnestly called upon all to cleave to the truth revealed through the prophet Joseph. 4 days before his death, Martin Harris avowed, Now, I don't believe, but I know it, the Book of Mormon, to be true. For with these eyes I saw the angel, and with these ears, pointing to them, I heard him say it was a true and correct record of an ancient people that dwelled upon this, the American continent, and I hereby testify to you, young men, that it is true. Similarly, David Whitmer declared, I want to give my dying testimony. You must be faithful in Christ. I want to say to you all that the Bible and the record of the Nephites, the Book of Mormon, are true. So you can say that you have heard me bear my testimony on my deathbed. The testimonies of the three witnesses constitute a strong endorsement of the Book of Mormon. Yet, the CES letter has concerns and questions, saying there are several critical problems for relying and betting on these 19th century men as credible witnesses. Several strategies are employed in the CES letter to support this indictment of the witnesses' testimonies. The first is to directly question their reliability. It is true that Martin Harris had a flowery imagination, and that if he were the only Book of Mormon witness, then the testimony might be more easily doubted. Yet, Martin too was skeptical. He carried the characters transcribed from the plates to Charles Anthon to verify their validity. On one occasion, while translating with Joseph, he substituted a different stone in place of the seer stone in order to test Joseph's translating ability. Joseph immediately discovered the switch, and Martin was satisfied. Concerning Oliver Cowdery, the CES letter quotes an early revelation from the Book of Commandments that speaks of a gift of Oliver's of working with a rod of nature. The CES letter asks, what is a rod of nature? And answers the question, it is a divining rod or dowsing rod, and then provides an image. The CES letter then reports that Oliver Cowdery used to hunt for buried treasure with the rod, which is completely undocumentable. Beyond the statement in the Book of Commandments, there are no historical references to Oliver and the rod of nature. When evaluating individuals living in other places and times, it is important to avoid presentism, where biases of the current society are superimposed upon others. Working with the divining rod seems strange to us today, but an 1826 article in the American Journal of Science and Arts on the divining rod states, men in various callings, men above the reach of mean arts, men of the soundest judgment, of large information, and of the most exemplary lives, do not disown the art. The revelation itself did not tell Oliver to abandon the practice, whatever it then entailed. Rather, he was told to use his gifts for righteous and higher purposes. John Stafford in 1881 was asked, "Did you know Oliver Cowdery?" To which he replied, "Yes, Cowdery was a man of good character." Similarly, Lorenzo Saunders was asked in 1884 if he knew Oliver Cowdery. He responded, "Yes, I was well acquainted with Cowdery. I never knew anything against Cowdery. He was a peaceable fellow." Regarding David Whitmer, the CES letter reproduces a statement published in 1887. "If you believe my testimony to the Book of Mormon, if you believe that God spake to us three witnesses by his own voice, then I tell you that in June 1838 God spake to me again by his own voice from the heavens and told me to separate myself from among the Latter-day Saints. For as they sought to do unto me, so it should be done unto them." The CES letter then asks a legitimate question. If David Whitmer is a credible witness, why are we only using his testimony of the Book of Mormon while ignoring his other testimony, claiming that God himself spoke to Whitmer by his own voice from the heavens in June 1838, commanding Whitmer to apostatize from the Lord's one and only true church? The chronology of this report is important. The Far West High Council met to consider David Whitmer's membership status on April 13, 1838, and listened to a letter written by him to the High Council, which stated that he did withdraw from your fellowship and communion. He was subsequently excommunicated. Then, in 1887, David reported that 2 months after his excommunication, God spoke to him and implied that this latter experience was as valid to Latter-day Saints as his testimony printed in the Book of Mormon. A brief comparison of the two experiences demonstrates multiple differences, but the fact that he had been cut off from the church and was defying revelation would diminish the credibility of the experience to church members independent of other important contrasts. A second tactic adopted by the CES letter to discredit the three witnesses' testimonies is labeling their experiences as imagination. In other words, saying the three witnesses just imagined the encounter with the angel. To support this allegation, the CES letter provides what looks to be 13 separate evidences from the three witnesses stating they were entranced or saw with a spiritual eye or simply the eye of faith. However, a closer examination of these quotations demonstrates that the first two are from the same source, an 1874 interview between Martin Harris and Anthony Metcalf. These three quotations are from a letter written by ex-Mormon Stephen Burnett. These three are all quoting an 1892 memorandum by Book of Mormon typesetter John H. Gilbert. These two citations are from an 1840 statement of John A. Clark. The last three quotations are hearsay or ambiguous. So, in review, there are 4 voices reporting the language of eye of faith or spiritual eyes. The 4 accounts have been inflated to appear to be as many as 13, which seems misleading. Also, they are not from all 3 of the witnesses, but just from Martin Harris. In addition, many other statements from Martin describing a non-imaginary experience are ignored. For example, there are far more than 4 quotations from Martin Harris stating that he handled the plates and saw the angel in broad daylight and heard a voice from heaven. Additional quotes are not cited from Oliver Cowdery, including statements where he said he saw the plates with his eyes, he handled the plates and even hefted them, and stood in the company of an angel. Oliver's death in 1848 resulted in fewer references in the historical record from him than the other witnesses. Also not included are references from David Whitmer saying what he saw was as plain as the furniture in the room where he then sat, that it was no delusion. He added that he saw an angel of God and heard his voice. David Whitmer left dozens of similar statements. All of these can be read at fairmormon.org by searching Book of Mormon Witnesses Statements. They show an overwhelming support that the experience of all three was not imaginary. A third approach in the CES letter to discredit the three witnesses' testimonies suggests that Joseph Smith influenced or manipulated their experiences. Naturalist critic Dan Vogel goes even further.
The testimony of three witnesses does not mention the presence of Joseph Smith, but clearly he played a central role. It was by his permission that they sought to become the three promised witnesses. They followed him into the wilderness, they obeyed his instructions regarding the order of prayer, and they had a vision because he was with them. Even Harris had no vision until Smith had joined him. We might well ask, why was Smith's presence required at an event, not requiring his presence? Could Joseph Smith have in some way induced the witnesses to hallucinate? This possibility has never been adequately explored or refuted by apologists.
Could Joseph Smith have induced the three witnesses to hallucinate? How might this have occurred?
Researchers have discovered that 10% of the population are extremely suggestible and capable of deep hypnotic trance. 10% are of low susceptibility, and 80% fall somewhere in between. The ability of the witnesses to respond to Joseph Smith's suggestions or to enter into a hypnotic-like state is directly correlative to their visionary histories.
Vogel's comment that a person's ability to enter a hypnotic state is correlative or correlative to their visionary histories seems to go well beyond the evidence. Even today, no scale to measure hypnotic susceptibility can be seen as consistently reliable due to the nature of hypnosis. Importantly, 19th century culture supported a belief in supernatural events that could be embraced by individuals of all hypnotic susceptibilities. To assume that such a belief constituted increased hypnotizability is not justified. Recent studies show that hypnotic susceptibility is a bell-shaped curve with the top 10% being highly hypnotizable. There is no way to know whether any of the three witnesses were in this group. Statistically, the likelihood of all three would have been 1 in 1,000. Other concerns emerge regarding the assumption that hypnotism was involved in any way. Paramount is the assertion that Joseph Smith possessed the skills of a highly trained hypnotist, which is problematic for several reasons, including the observation that it is anachronistic. The process of hypnosis was essentially unknown in rural America in the 1820s. The word and its meaning were so obscure that it was not present in the 1830 Webster's Dictionary. The first journals and books to mention hypnosis appeared in the 1840s. There simply was no source for Joseph Smith to learn that a hypnotic trance could be established, nor any mention of how it might occur. A second problem involves the ability of any hypnotist to induce a hypnotic trance in the three witnesses without them realizing what was happening. When asked if it was a hallucination, David Whitmer declared, "No, sir. I was not under any hallucination, nor was I deceived. I saw with these eyes and I heard with these ears. I know whereof I speak." On 2 occasions, he repeated, "It was no delusion." Clinical psychologist Michael D. Yapko explained, "Hypnotists are able to use their skills in communication to make acceptance of suggestions more likely, but there is no control over the client other than the control the client gives them." Professional hypnotist George Hewlett and Donald Peterson wrote that a person cannot be hypnotized against his will. A third problem is the ability of the skilled hypnotist to generate a vivid, complex hallucination the hypnotized subjects would afterwards recall. The three-witness testimony declares specific details like seeing an angel, viewing the plates, seeing the engravings, and hearing the voice of God. It was not solely auditory or visual, but a combination of both. David Whitmer reported additional particulars like the brass plates, a table, many records, the sword of Laban, the Liahona, and the Urim and Thummim. Studies have shown that while in a trance, hypnotic suggestion can influence a person's views and behaviors after they have awakened, but never to the degree implied, and without a person's full cooperation and awareness that hypnosis was involved. Even with a cooperative patient, it varies. Dr. James R. Council explains, within the individual, different levels of hypnosis seem to manifest themselves during a session, and across individuals, pronounced differences in responsiveness can be observed. There are also time limits to how long post-hypnotic suggestions will persist in the minds of the subjects. Professional stage hypnotist J.H. Laurier learned from his own career that post-hypnotic suggestion is a misnomer. It will fail if the time be deferred over 2 hours. A fourth difficulty is the idea that Joseph could have hypnotized the three witnesses and assured that the hallucinations experienced by David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery were the same. Physicians Gerald Maximum and Nicholas Ward re-emphasized that the hypnotist cannot control the patient. Other researchers recognize that the subjective experiences in response to suggestions from the hypnotist vary largely even among highly hypnotizable individuals. Critics may assert that the descriptions from the three witnesses were modified and correlated after the experience, but there is no evidence to support this. A fifth concern is how a hypnotist of any skill could have generated a similar hallucination in the mind of Martin Harris, whose experience came sometime after David and Oliver's. In summary, before promoting the idea that Joseph Smith may have hypnotized the three witnesses, causing them to hallucinate, a plausible explanation of how this might have actually been accomplished should be identified. That none exist is not surprising and provokes important questions. If Joseph had such power, why use it to just create Book of Mormon witnesses? If he could acquire it without any training, what would have kept others from doing so and abusing it to their personal advantage, and even sinister goals? If such were possible then, why not today? It would require all of us to be on constant lookout for the hypnotist who could exploit personal interests and induce a trance without us knowing it and plant ideas that would change our entire lives. Attempts to discredit the testimonies of the three witnesses in the CES letter seem less convincing. Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer were well respected, and Martin Harris to some degree. Claims that the witnesses only imagined the experience or saw only with spiritual eyes are misleading because they are based upon only 4 statements, all from Martin Harris. They ignore dozens of other declarations from all 3 witnesses affirming that it was not in their imagination. The century-old claim that Joseph Smith hypnotized the witnesses is anachronistic. It ascribes power to hypnosis to induce vivid, detailed hallucinations in multiple individuals simultaneously and without them allowing or realizing it. It would be a feat that has never been demonstrated or even remotely achieved in mentally healthy people. As historian Richard L. Bushman observes, secular historians have never come to grips with the fact that none of the 11 who saw the plates, in addition to Joseph Smith, ever recanted. Narrations that bulk before the miraculous events and try to tell another story, we could interject like the CES letter, must suppress these sources and disregard the consistent and detailed accounts from the people who knew Joseph best. For more information, see ldsanswers.net.